I'd like to welcome everyone to this very special presentation, which is sponsored by the Beth Shalom Preservation Foundation. And I should let you know that this lecture is being recorded and everybody, I believe, has been muted except for the speakers. After the presentation that you're about to hear takes place, there will be a question and answer session. Those questions should be populated into the chat room. And then the moderator for that will be Professor David Brownlee, who is a past president of the Preservation Foundation and an active, very active board member. I should also mention to you that we expect that just for your own planning purposes, that tonight's presentation should be concluded at about 7:15. That's what we're shooting for, so you can plan accordingly. So with that, I'll introduce our speaker tonight, Justin Gunther, who is the Vice President of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy and the Director of Fallingwater, Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece of organic architecture, which exemplifies the harmonious relationship between people and nature through design. Prior to this role, Justin served in preservation roles at other historic sites, including curator for Thomas Jefferson's Virginia State Capitol, the manager of restoration for George Washington's Mount Vernon, and curator for Fallingwater. For almost a decade, he has also taught historic preservation at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where he focused on economic redevelopment, recent past preservation, and the creative interpretation of heritage sites. Justin has a bachelor's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University and a Master of Fine Arts from the Savannah College of Art and Design. Justin actively contributes to the field of preservation through conference presentations, journal articles, and publications. In addition to professional pursuits, he takes great interest in community-based initiatives through positions on boards and special committees. He is currently the chair of the Frank Lloyd Wright World Heritage Council and serves on the board of the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy, the Iconic Houses International Advisory Committee, and the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra Jack Hines Advisory Board. And most importantly, I will say that Justin has been a wonderful and very valuable friend to Beth Shalom Synagogue and all of our endeavors. And we've had the privilege of working together on various projects. And I can't say how much we appreciate his participation in tonight's very special presentation. So without any further ado, I will let Justin take over for his presentation tonight. Thank you.
Herb, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I truly appreciate it. It's been an honor to work with you and Jill on tonight's presentation, and everyone at Beth Shalom and Professor Brownlee. I look forward to the Q&A at the end of the discussion. But again, thank you all for the opportunity to speak to you tonight about Fallingwater and its current preservation efforts and education efforts. And I'll start with a brief history of the house and then get into the preservation story of Fallingwater and all the challenges there, and then bring you up to date on all the great work that we're doing to share and interpret the site. And probably the most miraculous thing that we'll do tonight is get the screen share to work. So hold on one second while I try to do that. So someone should let me know whether or not you're seeing my screen so that I can go ahead and start the presentation.
I can see it.
All right, wonderful, wonderful. Well, Fallingwater is arguably one of the most iconic houses and recognizable houses in the world. Designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1935 and built from 1936 to 1939 for the Kaufman family of Pittsburgh. Fallingwater is Wright's tour de force and the architect's primary expression of what he called an organic architecture. For its design, Wright drew inspiration directly from nature for every element of the architecture. So the house is a unified composition where all the colors, materials, and dramatic sculptural forms are derived from the surrounding forest. The result is a house unlike any other that has the power to demonstrate how people can respect and live in harmony with the natural world. In recognition of its architectural and cultural importance, the National Park Service designated Fallingwater a National Historic Landmark in 1976. Pennsylvania gave it the distinction of a Commonwealth Treasure in 2000, and most recently in 2019, UNESCO added Fallingwater to the World Heritage List to recognize its outstanding significance and global importance. So what's remarkable about Fallingwater is that its creation story is a truly fascinating one. It's this fortuitous coming together of not just the perfect architect with the perfect clients, but also one of the perfect site. And thankfully for Frank Lloyd Wright, the clients had not only the vision to accept his ideas of organic architecture, but the financial means to do so. The house, by the time it was done, ended up 5 times over budget. So the original estimate was $35,000, ended up costing over $155,000 by the time the project was done. But Fallingwater, the commission of the house, was a pivotal hinge point for Frank Lloyd Wright. If Fallingwater had not happened and had not been such an international success, Wright and his ideas could have largely faded away, and along with that, his relevance and popularity. In the early 1930s, when Fallingwater was designed, Wright was in his 60s. We have to remember that he was born in 1867, right after the American Civil War ended. So he was really a product of the 19th century. And although he held a position of intense respect and was still designing and lecturing, Wright had not realized a major commission in almost a decade. So this was partially due to the Great Depression when new construction was largely at a standstill. But Wright's younger contemporaries labeled him as a grandfather of the modern movement. They joked behind his back that he was like Moses. He had helped lead the way to the promised land of modernism, but hadn't quite made it there himself. And his naturalistic organic architecture just wasn't in fashion. The European internationalists with their rationalistic machines for living, like Le Corbusier's Villa Savoye, with its cubic forms and flat white walls, overshadowed Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture. And it was the Europeans that were leading the way forward. So in an effort to drum up business and promote his philosophy of organic architecture, Wright published his autobiography in 1932 and started the Taliesin Fellowship, an apprenticeship program at his home and studio in Taliesin, Spring Green, Wisconsin, to train the next generation of his disciples. And lucky for him, at about this same time, the Kaufmans of Pittsburgh come into the picture. Edgar and Lillian Kaufman were tastemakers. They traveled the world, befriending artists and architects and designers from around the globe. They were members of the cultural elite, and they also were owners of Pittsburgh's largest department store, 11 stories tall and taking up an entire city block in downtown Pittsburgh. They had one son, Edgar Kaufman Jr., who, as a young man in his early 20s and at his coming of age, had spent time in Europe studying design in Vienna, had apprenticed as a painter in Florence, and at the recommendation of one of his close friends, had just read Frank Lloyd Wright's recently published autobiography. And he was instantly captivated by Wright's ideas of organic architecture. And as he was trying to figure out what he wanted to do with his adult life, he recalled that Frank Lloyd Wright's words trickled into his mind like the first drops of irrigation in a desert land. He kind of instantly soaked up these ideas of organic architecture, and they appealed to his romantic and idealistic side. So Edgar Kaufman Jr. traveled to Taliesin to interview for a spot in Wright's new fellowship and was accepted. I think Wright knew how to sniff out a good client, and the fact that Edgar Kaufman Jr.'s parents owned one of the country's leading department stores made him a shoe-in for acceptance into the fellowship. Here's a photograph of Edgar Kaufman Jr. On the left with Frank Lloyd Wright on the right in his signature beret, and then in the middle is another apprentice, Bill Bernuti. And this is at Taliesin. But his parents soon came out to Taliesin to visit their son and to visit with Frank Lloyd Wright. They instantly connected, just like Edgar Jr. did, with his visionary approach to architecture, with these ideas of the organic. And the Kaufmans talked with Wright about large-scale civic projects for Pittsburgh. Edgar Kaufman Sr. was a visionary planner and civic leader, so they discussed ideas about a planetarium for the city, an executive office for him in the department store, and even a circular parking garage for the Kaufman's department store, which was sort of a precedent for the Guggenheim Museum that would be realized later. But in addition to their home in Pittsburgh, the Kaufmans also owned a summer camp in the mountains about 60 miles southeast of Pittsburgh, which they use as a retreat from the smog of the Steel City. And they also allowed the employees of the department store to come out to the camp as a retreat. There was a clubhouse, racetrack, tennis courts, sleeping cabins scattered throughout the landscape, even a trout hatchery to stock the stream that coursed through, called Bear Run. The Kaufmans loved going out to the camp with the employees, and they had a modest, rustic summer cabin on the grounds that they called the Hangover Cabin, because it was perched on a rock ledge, but also because they liked to drink and have a good time out in the mountains. This was still Prohibition era, so I'm not sure where the alcohol was necessarily coming from, probably some good moonshine. But central to the landscape was a series of waterfalls. This is where the Kaufmans liked to go for sunning, bathing, and picnicking. And after their introduction to Frank Lloyd Wright, the Kaufmans started entertaining the idea of a more formal, year-round vacation house to replace the Hangover, one with modern conveniences and close to the waterfalls, where they most liked to enjoy their time in the landscape. And the Kaufmans were forward-thinking. They were eager to do something unique and far from the standard of the day, so they didn't really want another neoclassical pile as their country house. And they thought that Wright could bring them something visionary, something unique. They thought he'd be the perfect architect. And for Frank Lloyd Wright, this was an opportunity to break away from the European internationalism that was stealing the spotlight and create something that was more organic, more democratic, more American in its form of modernism. So Wright visited the waterfall site with the Kaufmans in December 1934, returned to Taliesin to start a design. And of course, the Kaufmans were expecting a house looking at the falls. Instead, Wright envisioned something completely different. After visiting the site, Wright was immediately drawn to the power of the falls, just like the Kaufmans were. And he'd been fascinated with waterfalls ever since his travels to Japan in the early 1900s, where he studied and photographed shrines and temples and sacred spaces in the landscape, often next to waterfalls. So like the Shinto shrine at the base of Ono Falls in Wright's woodblock by Hokusai, Wright envisioned a house for communion with the spirituality of the falls, his version of a temple by a sacred space in the landscape. So taking direct cues from nature, he conceived of a house designed to the music of the stream, a symphony of a sculptural cascade of structural forms suggesting motion and rushing water. The building appeared to grow directly from the boulders of the site, with cantilevered living spaces vigorously projected over the falls and into the forest, much like the rock ledges of the waterfalls. And whatever the previous expectations and whatever the problems suggested by the plans, the Kaufmans saw this amazing augmentation of their love of in this idea of refreshment and connection to nature. So construction began in 1936. The house was largely built of reinforced concrete. And here you can see the foundation bolsters rising up from the rock of the stream bed. Then native Pottsville sandstone was quarried directly from the site and used to make the structural walls of the house, laid up in forms that mimic the natural rock formations found in the landscape. Then a wooden scaffolding was erected to support the formworks for the reinforced concrete cantilever pours. The workers went out into the forest and cut down young growth trees to serve as the poles for the scaffold. And I think if I'd seen this scaffold and I was the Kaufmans, I would have probably run the other direction. Looks kind of precarious, but it worked. And here's all of that scaffold and the formwork removed. The shell of the house mostly finished at the end of 1936. You see that they still need to put in the glass and the steel of the window and door frames. Fallingwater, even before it was finished, was instantly famous. The built-in furniture wasn't even installed yet before Fallingwater was given a solo exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in 1938, organized by John McAndrew, the curator of architecture and industrial design at MoMA. And Time magazine chose Fallingwater and Frank Lloyd Wright for its cover of January 17th, 1938, calling Fallingwater Wright's most beautiful job. So this consensus arose that Wright had created a masterwork not only appealing to the architecture community, but to the general public. And over time, the house's popularity continued to grow as the Kaufmans invited to the house as guests just about every mover and shaker of the modern movement. So Frida Kahlo was a guest, Albert Einstein, Walter Gropius, Philip Johnson, Marcel Breuer, Alfred Barr, who was the director of the Museum of Modern Art, Henry Russell Hitchcock. All the greats came to spend time at Fallingwater with the Kaufmans. And one can say that the house certainly marks a high point in Wright's career and in American architecture. The commission reignites Wright's career and propels him into his most prolific phase of his practice. He'd go on to realize another 300 buildings before dying in 1959. So the Fallingwater Commission and the Kaufman's patronage reinstated Wright's position as a leader of the modern movement and basically dispelled any notion that Wright would simply drift off into the background in his older age. So the house is a masterpiece of his philosophy of organic architecture. Fallingwater's a unified composition of landscape, buildings, and interiors where architecture and nature harmonize. And the living room is one of Wright's greatest expressions of this idea of breaking down the box, the revolutionary idea of the open plan, where all functions communicate in one flexible living space for playing, working, dining, and enjoyment. Nature is invited indoors, just like one of the massive boulders native to the site penetrates up through the floor to become the hearth of the fireplace. And then that stone of the fireplace just seems to grow directly out of that boulder, physically rooting the house to its site. The glass hatch in the living room, the top of it telescoping open to provide direct communication with the stream below, linking the rushing water that inspired the overall form of the house to the interior and allowing cool air and smells of the stream to rise up and permeate the space. And always, with windows and doors swung open, the boundary line between inside and outside space is blurred. Wright's intent always to draw your attention to the outdoors and to nature. And that blurring of that boundary line between inside and outside is reinforced by the continuity of materials between in and out. So by allowing glass to just terminate directly into the stonework without any sort of frame, reinforces this effect of blurring that line between in and out. And the house's strong horizontal bands wrapped in glass give the house tremendous transparency. So at night, as Edgar Kaufman Jr. stated, the house lights up like a Japanese lantern hanging in the forest. So the family enjoys the house as their retreat through the 1940s. And then Edgar Kaufman Sr. and Lillian Kaufman both pass away in the 1950s, at which point the house goes to Edgar Kaufman Jr. He, of course, loves Fallingwater, but his life was firmly rooted in New York. The family had sold their interest to the department store in the 1940s, so Edgar Kaufman Jr.'s ties to Pittsburgh were few. So he follows his passion for art and design and succeeds Elliot Noyes as the curator of industrial design at MoMA and later head of the Good Design program at MoMA from 1950 to 1955. After leaving MoMA, he begins teaching architectural history at Columbia and publishes extensively on design. And while he's frequently traveling to Fallingwater on weekends and keeps the house until 1963, he decides to donate Fallingwater and over 1,000 acres of land to the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy in 1963. And here's Edgar Kaufman Jr. passing the deed off to the then president of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, Dr. Charles Lewis, and the witnesses there are the governor and first lady of Pennsylvania. In his dedication speech at this donation, Edgar Kaufman Jr. stated that Fallingwater was a house not built by a man for a man, but a house built by man for man. He understood that the house should be, rather than a private indulgence, to be something that was placed into the public as a resource. And he decided against typical models of stewardship. So instead of giving Fallingwater to an art museum or a preservation organization, he instead decides on the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, a land and water conservation organization. So he didn't want the house frozen in time. He didn't want it sort of locked in the past. He wanted Fallingwater to continue living like the nature that inspired it to evolve organically, to be a vital educational resource by inspiring people through Wright's architecture and this connection to nature. So the house opens for tours in 1964, and at that time it has the distinction of being the first house of the modern movement to open as a museum. So it's been a public site for 62 years, one with the widest exposure. The first year of operation in 1964, they were hoping for a few thousand people to come visit. Over 30,000 visited that first year, and the visitation has grown steadily ever since. But the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy's stewardship of the house does not come without challenges. So that brings me to the next segment of discussion, which is the preservation story of the house. And I kind of love this cartoon drawing of Fallingwater by David Macaulay, where water is consuming Fallingwater. The very thing that inspires the architecture is the primary enemy to its preservation. And if you look closely at this cartoon in the lower right, is Frank Lloyd Wright below the falls, just shrugging his shoulders and putting up his hands. So I find this a wonderful illustration of the very challenge that is preserving Fallingwater. And sometimes the preservation challenge comes directly from the stream itself. In the 1950s, a massive flood basically destroyed the steps that descend down from the living room to the stream. There was so much water and debris coming down with the rushing water that it wiped those stairs out. It had also knocked the famous Jacques Lipchitz mother and child sculpture into the stream and over the falls. Jacques Lipchitz was still alive in the 1950s, so he was able to conserve that sculpture. But you see here a repeat incident of a flood. This is from 2017, and you see that same Jacques Lipchitz sculpture bobbing like a fishing bobber in the stream. At least we learned to tether the sculpture to the house with a chain. And here you see the rescue effort to save that sculpture and put it back in its place, and then the subsequent conservation by our sculpture conservators to get the sculpture back in good shape. But sometimes the very thing, again, that inspires the architecture, the stream, the rushing water, is the primary enemy of the house. And I'll also preface this discussion about preservation. We can often place blame on Frank Lloyd Wright for the design choices that he makes, but we also have to remember that Wright is pushing every boundary, every conceivable notion of living and building in the 1930s to revolutionize what we think can be a house. So he's really pushing the limits of design, pushing the limits of construction, and the limits of new materials, and experimenting with something pretty revolutionary. So we'll give him a little bit of slack as we discuss some of the failures of the house. But central to the design intent of Fallingwater are these ideas of strong horizontal lines. So I'm showing you an aerial view of Fallingwater looking straight down on the architecture. And because of the intent on strong horizontals, you have a lot of flat roof surfaces, and of course the terrace spaces. serve as roofs for interior spaces below them. So ever since its beginning, waterproofing those flat roofs and terraces proved difficult. Here's a construction photo from the original construction in 1936. The original roofing was simply building felts impregnated with hot asphalt, which was always a difficult condition to waterproof the interior with. And in the Frank Lloyd Wright community, as you all know, we often classify our buildings by how many buckets it takes to capture all the roof leaks. So even from the beginning, I think Fallingwater was a 12 or 14 bucket house. And Wright also insisted on no flashings. So where waterproofing met stone, or where waterproofing membranes met the concrete walls, there were no flashings, so water inevitably found its way underneath that waterproofing and then dripped to the interior. The roofs have been replaced twice, once in the 1980s, and then this is a replacement of the roofing in the early 2000s. Every time the roofs had been replaced in the past, obviously adapting to the newest technology for roofing and building in redundancy and the waterproofing to try and eliminate those roof leaks. Because Frank Lloyd Wright was trying to mimic the natural stone formations and to give it a naturalistic look, for some of the thin, narrow stones that were laid up in the walls, he allowed them to bump out from the flat plane of the vertical surface. Internally, we call these the bump out stones. The other reason for doing this was to give some great shadow play to the stone walls. So you get these wonderful lines of shadow on the stonework. But these bump outs also are perfect shelves for snow to accumulate and for water to accumulate. And then as that water freezes and thaws, it attacks the mortar and the joints, causing the mortar to deteriorate and for hairline cracks to form in that mortar. So there's a fairly constant regime here of repointing those mortar joints to keep the stonework in good shape. Because Frank Lloyd Wright wanted all of the concrete surfaces, all of the reinforced concrete surfaces to be smooth and to be continuous, he didn't advocate for the inclusion of expansion and contraction joints in the reinforced concrete. So as the building expands and contracts and fights against itself with seasonal changes in temperature and weather, hairline cracks form in the reinforced concrete. And what that does is allows water to get into the reinforced concrete. And as the freeze-thaw cycles happen, it causes the concrete to deteriorate somewhat into spall. So again, there's also sort of a constant lineup of concrete patching that occurs on Fallingwater to keep those concrete surfaces with the original design intent of being these smooth, continuous surfaces of masonry. Ever since the beginnings, it was difficult to have paint adhere to the concrete surfaces. That was largely due to the high humidity of the site and also just the nature of concrete and paint adhesion. The original paint system was actually called semilith. It was this cementitious-based paint, the hope there being that the cement base would help it stick to the concrete. But over the years, the Kaufmans tried numerous different paint systems with minimal success. And then in the early 2000s, over 120 different paint systems were tested on all the different surfaces of Fallingwater, from flat horizontal to vertical surfaces of the concrete. And it ended up that Pittsburgh Paints, PPG Paints, came up with the best system for adhesion to the concrete. And it actually uses an alkali-resistant primer. That alkali resistance in the primer fights the alkaline nature of the concrete and creates very strong adhesion to the concrete. And then a top coat that has low VOC for environmental friendliness is added on top of that primer. And ever since the early 2000s, that paint system has proven effective on the concrete surfaces. Of course, it's tinted to match the original ochre color of the paint that Wright specified. All of the steel of the window and door frames, of course, is under constant attack from the high humidity of the architecture being built over the stream. So there's been a fair amount of conservation to the steel of those windows and door frames. Here's a slide from again, from the early 2000s, a major effort to restore all of the rust and remediate all of that failure in the steel and to repair that. The glass, again, as we discussed earlier, creates that blurring of the boundary line between inside and outside space, but it also allows a tremendous amount of UV light into the interiors. And we have an interior that's made up of over 170 pieces of original Frank Lloyd Wright designed black walnut furniture that suffers from fading from UV light, and also an interior loaded with original textiles. So in the 1980s, all of the original plate glass that was installed in the house was removed and replaced with a laminate glass system. So a laminate glass basically has a UV filter that's sandwiched in between two pieces of plate glass. So comprehensively throughout all of the house, a SafeFlex glass system was installed, which was a new material in the 1980s when it was installed. But over time, the interlayer, the UV filter inside of the glass started to be attacked by the high moisture of the environment, particularly at the exposed edges where the glass kind of butts together at these frameless corners. The water was attacking the inner layer, causing the laminate glass to cloud and then to delaminate. So another study was done to come up with a new laminate glass system to protect the interior collection. And in 2007 to 2011, a new glass system developed by DuPont was installed that had proven edge stability. They had tested the same glass as a glass railing on top of the Rockefeller Center in New York. So we figured if it could last on top of the Rockefeller Center in that weather, it could withstand the moisture environment of Fallingwater. So that glass has been installed and is performing well inside the house. And then speaking of that Frank Lloyd Wright designed furniture, it's all black walnut veneer over a subsurface of marine grade plywood. That veneer is held to the plywood with animal hide glue. But again, moisture and water is the primary enemy of the house. That moisture of the humidity from the stream attacks that animal hide glue and causes it to degrade over time, and then the veneer pops on the built-in furniture and freestanding furniture. So we have an annual regime of furniture conservation. Each winter when we close to the public, our furniture conservator comes in to do cyclical care on all of the veneer and all of the finish on the Frank Lloyd Wright design furniture. And then that brings me to the house's biggest preservation challenge, which deals with its cantilever system. We can all agree that Fallingwater is a sculptural masterpiece, but in many ways, Wright created a structural failure as he was experimenting with pushing cantilever design in a residential form to its limits. From these red lines, you can see what horizontal is, and then you can see how much the cantilevers have dropped throughout the history of the house. I guess we can all argue that we sag with age. The house has sagged about 6 to 7 inches off of horizontal. And this was a condition that started right after the formwork was removed from the construction. The house cantilevers of the first floor and the second floor started to fail. And Frank Lloyd Wright reassured the Kaufmans that it was just the natural settlement of the house. It just dipping down a little bit as the house learned to be without support. The Kaufman family had confidence in their architect, Edgar Kaufman Jr., once he inherited the house, continued to have that confidence that even though the house had sagged, it was stable. And it actually wasn't until 1997 that the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy um, looked at this issue again. A graduate student from the University of Virginia, John Paul Hughley, had done his master's thesis on Fallingwater. He looked at all of the archival evidence and did the structural engineering calculations on the cantilevers. And his thesis showed that Fallingwater shouldn't be standing. So he brought his thesis to the then director of Fallingwater, Linda Wagoner, which of course alarmed her. So she immediately brought in Robert Silman Associates out of New York, one of the best firms in structural engineering for historic buildings at the time in the late 1990s. So they instantly put on crack meters and tilt monitors all over the house to study the dipping of the cantilevers, and their studies showed that the house was continuing to sag downward ever so incrementally. So they immediately installed steel shoring at that time, 1997, to carry all of the load of the cantilevers to the rock of the stream bed. And then they even put in jacks underneath the rock ledge of the waterfall just to ensure that any transfer of load of the architecture to the ledge of the waterfall didn't actually make the ledge of the waterfall potentially collapse. So what was going on here? So if we look at this perspective drawing of Fallingwater, this illustration, and then strip away most of the architecture down to the foundations, you can see the three concrete bolsters that rise up from the stream, and then to the left of those three concrete piers or bolsters is a stone wall made out of stone masonry. So laying on top of each of those four foundation supports is a huge beam of reinforced concrete. So this has rebar, or bars of reinforcing steel, immersed in a pour of concrete. So all of the weight of the second story cantilever transfers down to the first story cantilever through the steel of the window framing. So all of that mass of the second floor cantilever and the first floor cantilever is carried by those four large beams of reinforced concrete. And what Wright failed to do was to put enough steel reinforcing in the top of those beams to resist all of that downward mass that was pressing down on those four beams. So the solution that Robert Silman created is this idea of post-tensioning. So he was going to install post-tensioning cabling to the sides of each of those four cantilever beams to basically supplement the original engineering with new technology. So to install those post-tensioning cables alongside of the concrete beams, we basically had to deconstruct the house to get back to the original beams underneath the floor of the living room. So here's a slide view of the living room with all of the furniture removed, and then the flagstones of the floor numbered like a giant jigsaw puzzle so that it could be put back together later on. And then here's the inside of the living room with the floor removed, all of the furniture taken out, and you can see one of those massive reinforced concrete structural beams fully exposed now, the inside of the subfloor completely exposed. And then here's what that same beam, again, now with the post-tensioning cables installed along the side of the beam. And then this is a side view of one of those same beams looking at the subfloor of the architecture of the living room. So if you can kind of let your mind think that this is the section view of the house kind of sliced down the middle. The red line being one of those bundles of post-tensioning cables. At the left, at the end of that red line, the cables are out at the end of the cantilever out over the stream. and then the bundles of cables are brought up high in the middle and then back down deep inside of the house. So I kind of think of this almost like a violin. So if you think of the house cantilever as a violin, the cabling brought up high in the middle, just like a string would be brought over the bridge of the violin. And then when you tune the instrument at the top of the violin and you tighten those strings, the entire instrument tenses up. So when tension is applied to these bundles of cables, the whole structure of the house is tensioned and tightened up. And then the cables keep the house from moving down and from collapsing. So here's those, again, another view of those bundles of cables alongside the cantilever beams. They're kind of locked in place by this concrete blocking. And then here's the far side of the cantilever out over the stream, the cables kind of projecting out through the face of the cantilever. And then these jacks were placed over those bundles of cables. The jack then applied the tension to the cable, and the cables were tied off. And of course, when this is happening and the stressing is given to the cables, of course, none of us were stressed. Of course not. But enough stress was put onto those post-tensioning cables to just lift the cantilever system up about a quarter of an inch off of the shoring that had been installed underneath the house, rather than take the house back up completely to horizontal. That could have caused more damage than good. The house had learned that 6 or 7 inches of failure over time. So by taking the entire house back up to horizontal, it could have damaged built-in furniture or the steel or the glass that had sort of learned all of that failure over time. So then once all the cables were put in place, the floor was put back, each piece in its original position. All the furniture was then reinstalled. And then this post-tensioning cabling system completely hidden in the subfloor of the house, completely preserving Wright's original design intent of these cantilevers floating over a waterfall, and then the scaffolding and the shoring to do the work was taken down. So it's a super elegant solution to a tremendously challenging preservation problem. Then in 2019, in preparation for a UNESCO World Heritage inscription, so all of that post-tensioning work was done in the early 2000s. So 2019 comes around, we're getting ready for UNESCO World Heritage inscription. So we decide to do another complete assessment of the state of preservation of the house in preparation for that long-term commitment as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we brought in our preservation team out of New York Architectural Preservation Studios, headed up by Pamela Jerome, and our structural engineer, John Matteo, out of Washington, D.C. Both of those architects had originally worked on the post-tensioning project in the early 2000s, so they had great institutional knowledge already of the house. So they did a full-scale assessment. A completely new drawing set was created of the house, done by AGP, which is an architectural preservation firm out of Paris. They were the same firm that did all of the architectural drawings and laser scanning of Notre Dame, which served invaluable after Notre Dame's drastic fire, and all of the work that AGP did allowed them to effectively preserve Notre Dame, which was recently finished. But along with the drawing set, full laser scanning was done of the architecture, and then all of that information from the laser scanning is overlaid on the drawing set. So you have this full assessment laden with fantastic documentation and information that can then help you understand where the work needs to be done. The result of all of that assessment and documentation was a preservation master plan completed in 2019 that basically we hope will preserve Fallingwater for the next 20 years. but it was a comprehensive look at work that needed to be done to essentially make Fallingwater watertight and address all of the building systems, from the waterproofing membranes on the roofs and the terraces to the stone masonry to the steel, and hopefully get it from being a 12 bucket house down to a no bucket house to capture water leaks. And here's Pamela Jerome and John Matteo, our preservation architect and structural engineer. You can tell during the pandemics, kind of putting some final touches on that preservation master plan at the pool at the guest house. So this kicked off our World Heritage Preserved campaign for fundraising, which we started in 2019. Of course, the pandemic put the fundraising for this project on hold during 2020. We picked it back up in 2021, raised with the help of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania through a redevelopment assistance capital program grant, $7 million to carry out this comprehensive preservation work over the course of 3 years. And we're more than 2/3 of the way done, with the hopes of all the work being completed by next spring. But funny how history sort of repeats itself with the original scaffolding photo on the left and what the house looked like at the end of last year, as we prepared to do a lot of the work over the course of the winter when we're closed to the public. Scaffold erected all the way from the base of the waterfall all the way to the top of the tower. And then all of that scaffold eventually wrapped with insulation and plastic sheeting, so that work could be carried out over the course of the winter months while we were closed to the public. So again, this involves re-waterproofing all of the terraces. So that requires removing all of those flagstones, numbering them, again, like that giant jigsaw puzzle, so that we can put them all back when we're done. And here's a view of that same terrace, all the flagstones removed, new waterproofing system put in place, and then all of those flagstones put back, remortared, new flashings put in to create a watertight seal between the concrete parapet walls, the waterproofing underneath the flagstones. And then the same for all the concrete slabs of the flat roofs. So this is a view of the guest house and servants' quarters. We basically have to build a roof over the roofs so that we can do the work. So this scaffolding system creates a superstructure for a temporary roof that gets built over the slab roof, so that we have a dry and heated working environment for the application of the new roofing systems. So here's the old roof that was put in 2000, scraped off, ready for the new roof to go down. And here's that new roofing system, which is a modified bitumen system that's rolled and then torch applied down. And there's multiple redundancy in this new roofing system. So here's a mock-up of the many layers. There's nine different layers of waterproofing that are being put into place, building tons of redundancy into the roofing system. So hopefully we eliminate all of the roofing leaks. We're also addressing areas of failed reinforced concrete as part of this work. So the preservation team went around and basically with a hammer sounds all the reinforced concrete to sort of see where there might be failure. And we always knew that one of the particularly bad places of concrete failure was out over the waterfall on the second floor cantilever, that corner that hangs almost 40 feet up in the air above the waterfalls. So here's a view of that same corner and how much concrete failure there was in that corner. The rebar actually in pretty good shape. That's the original rebar there, showing very little rust. So then that failed concrete was removed, and then a new pour put in place to restore that failed concrete. The other issue that we have with water infiltration at Fallingwater is in the stone masonry itself. So if you remember those bump out stones where the water sits on these little rock shelves in the masonry, well, it's causing hairline cracks in the mortar joints on the sides of the stone masonry walls. So then water actually finds its way in through the sides of the stone masonry and then travels down through the stone masonry. So it actually doesn't come down from the top. There's through flashing underneath the capstones of the masonry walls. So the water isn't penetrating from the top down. It's coming in through the sides. Here's a picture from the original construction that maybe will help you understand how that happens a little bit. So the exterior of the stone masonry is one course of stone. The interior is another course of stone, and that leaves a gap inside of the stone walls where they filled it with rubble. So there's voids inside of the stone masonry wall. So as water finds its way in through cracks in the mortar joints, from the exterior. It then travels down through those voids in the stone walls and then finds exit points out in the interior. So the solution that was devised for this is called grout injection. So here's our masonry team using ground penetrating radar, a handheld ground penetrating radar unit, to basically X-ray the wall and discover the voids inside the wall and the possible pathways for water to travel from the mortar joints to the inside and then back out on the inside of the house. So hundreds of little holes are drilled in the mortar joints of the stone walls. And then in those holes, they're pumped with liquid grout. And you start at the bottom of the wall and then work your way up to the top. And as you go course by course, you plug the holes in so that liquid grout can't seep back out. So the goal of this being we're filling all of those voids inside the stone masonry with grout. And then once that grout hardens, it essentially makes the entire stone masonry a solid masonry unit so that the water has no way to penetrate through it from the outside and exit out into the inside of the house. We're also taking this chance to conserve all of the steel of the window and door frames. So wherever there's rust that needs to be remediated, that rust is addressed, and then all of the steel is being reprimed and painted in Wright's signature red color. And all of this work that's going on, I invite you to take a look at our Fallingwater live cam. You can kind of see the current conditions of the house and where we have scaffolding up and where we have enclosures up as we complete this work. This is a shot from this past December when the house was getting completely wrapped in scaffolding to do a lot of the work. We also do a blog every month on our website to update everyone on this work. Again, we hope that this is all done by March of 2026, just in time for Fallingwater's 90th anniversary next year. And because the work is being balanced with visitation while we are open, many of our tours this season have been geared toward that preservation story. So our educators are interpreting what it takes to steward a house like Fallingwater and the complexities of preserving Wright's architecture. Again, is part of the assessment work and as part of the documentation for all of this preservation work, we've been laser scanning the architecture throughout the course of the project. And this has been a collaboration with Autodesk, a local firm here called Ursula Leo, and another local firm called Case Technologies. The goal being, of course, the digital preservation record of the laser scanning data, but all of that is being translated into a virtual model of Fallingwater that will eventually be navigable on a web browser, which will have all kinds of educational possibilities, particularly from an accessibility standpoint. So people, 100, 250 miles away or from around the globe in countries all over the world will be able to visit virtually rather than coming on site. And also people that don't have the physical ability to traverse all of the architecture. This will be a tremendous accessibility tool for them so that they can explore the property at all different levels. So why do we do all of this preservation work? And we do it because of the educational value of sharing it. And of course, our main educational program is our public tour program. We see about 140,000 people a year. Here's a wonderful graph that I like to show from the first year of visitation in 1964 all the way to the present. And you see that sort of precipitous drop of the pandemic, that drastic drop down, and then our kind of consistent growth back up. But one of the things that we learned during the pandemic was the value of smaller group sizes. So we've replateaued our visitation at around 135, 140,000 visitors each year. That creates smaller group sizes, and those smaller group sizes increase engagement with our visitors, and that translates into repeat visitation, memberships. And it also ensures the long-term preservation of the house by reducing overall wear and tear. Another thing that we learned from the pandemic was the value of virtual programming. So now we do virtual field trips with K through 12 students across the country and the globe, actually. Just this year, we've connected with 49 different schools, reaching almost 2,000 students in those schools. And the farthest school we've done a virtual field trip with this year was in Thailand. We completed this facility, which is just a quarter mile up the hill from Fallingwater, called High Meadow in 2016, 2017. This is our High Meadow Residency Center. So in addition to public tour programs, we really have expanded our educational mission. This facility allows us to do multi-day, even week-long residency-based learning programs that are immersive on our site. So you come, you immerse for multiple days, you learn the lessons of nature and Frank Lloyd Wright's organic architecture, and you apply those in different ways. So each summer we do high school residencies. This past summer we connected with 90 high school students through week-long residency programs. These are for high school students interested in the design and building arts world. So we help them prep their portfolios for college applications. And for those that can't come to do a physical week-long on-site residency, we also do virtual summer camps for high school students. We do college residency programs at High Meadow. This past season in early spring, we connected with University of Pittsburgh students, Washington State students, Chatham University, Virginia Tech, and over 80 college students participated in those programs. We do adult learning workshops on site. So these are just day-long or just half-day on-site workshops in plein air painting, ikebana, photography, poetry, also connecting to the landscape with birding workshops. But we also do multi-day residency-based adult learning workshops for working professionals. And we call those programs our Insight On-Site program. We do those in classical music, geology to sort of capture the geology of the stone of the local landscape and of the house. Of course, in architecture, interior design, visual arts, and creative writing. We invite artists and scholars to come spend extended amounts of time on site. So this is an example of Eleanor Pritchard. She's a British weaver. She came and spent several weeks on site, staying and taking inspiration from the architecture. And these are process-based artist residencies. So we ask them to just come, learn about Fallingwater, apply their process of design, their artistic process to their experience, and then put forth a proposal to us about a possible outcome. Eleanor created a textile, which you see draped over the foot of the bed, inspired by the steel framing of the windows and the stone masonry of the house, and of course, Wright's signature red. Here's another example of an artist residency, Luftwork out of Chicago. Petra and Sean came up with this digital projection mapping project for the architecture. We also sort of push our message out to different audiences through exhibitions that we hold here at Fallingwater, but that we also travel. We did this great exhibition of Kaufman commissioned Frank Lloyd Wright projects that had not been realized. And we realized those projects as virtual animations, and we've had that exhibition at the National Building Museum for over a year. And then we just layer other art forms onto the house. We do food-based experiences called forest to table dinners, where our chef takes seasonal inspiration from the forest and then translates that into an evening dining experience. We add music to the inside of the house to make it come alive, jazz or classical, and also sometimes vocals. And we continue this idea of the house being this salon for creative thinking, critical discourse, just like the Kaufmans did. So we have a program called Fallingwater Fireside. Here's Daniel Liebesken in conversation with me in the living room. And then the Kaufmans Dairy Barn, the Kaufmans had this idea of having this self-sustaining country estate. So they purchased a neighboring farm and had a herd of Jersey cows and a cooperative with local dairy farmers. But we've converted this building into a conference center, event center. We do all kinds of barn weddings here throughout the season. It's an additional source of revenue for us. And this building is a LEED Silver certified green and sustainable building. So sort of carrying on the tradition of Wright being the father of organic architecture and sort of the green and sustainable architecture. In every project that we do where we rehabilitate a building or repair a building, we try and do it in the most sustainable way possible. Continuing that through all of our operations across the site. So just about 2 years ago, we installed this solar array to offset our energy consumption across our campus, which consists of about 20 buildings in addition to Fallingwater. So that's where we are currently. Lots of preservation work going on. Again, I hope that all of that work is done by March of next year, so that we can celebrate our 90th anniversary with a fully preserved Fallingwater for all of us to enjoy. So I'll stop there and then maybe take a few questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Justin. That was a very, very interesting presentation, and as a member of the Beth Shalom Preservation Foundation, there were a lot of common themes that,
Yes, common themes with Wright.
particularly as it related to water.
Yes.
So we have our own challenges there, and but it was I guess to some extent I felt a little bit better seeing all the
Yeah.
things that you guys are going through.
Misery loves company.
Exactly. And anyway, very, very impressive, and I thank you very much for that. And I'll turn it over to David and for the questions that came through the chat.
Wonderful.
Right. Yes. I join Herb in thanking you, and I must say, as we face a Frank Lloyd Wright-sized challenge when it comes to preservation and leak prevention, we take some encouragement from your success. I must say that a 12 bucket house is really not very special. We have a 20 children's swimming pool synagogue, and
There you go. I love that.
20
I mean, I
swimming
don't love that
pools.
for you, but I loved it.
20 swimming pools beats 12 buckets any day of the week.
There you go.
But there are just a few questions that have come in the chat.
Wonderful.
I mean, the first one, just to say this has been recorded, and it is our intention to put it up on our website,
Great.
where we have recordings of a number of other talks that have been given in or virtually at Beth Shalom. But there are a couple of specific questions that I'll share with you. Lonnie Hovey asks, did Edgar Kaufman build the Frank Lloyd Wright designed office in the department store? I know the answer, but I'll let you answer it.
Yes, yeah. So the office was realized sort of concurrently with the early work at Fallingwater. In many ways, it was sort of a test case for how the Fallingwater Commission would go. But that was realized. Wonderful cypress paneled interior, floor to ceiling, and even the ceiling. this kind of wonderful geometric wall abstraction of a mural out of wood at one end of the room. Of course, Wright designed all the furniture in addition to the space itself. And then Loya Saarinen at Cranbrook was commissioned to weave the textiles for the furniture upholstery and for the floor rugs. Edgar Kaufman Jr. ended up donating the Kaufman office after some consideration to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. He wanted a Frank Lloyd Wright space in the UK. So it's the only Frank Lloyd Wright space in the United Kingdom, well, in all of Europe. And it was taken off display many years ago, and then now is permanently back on display. The Victoria and Albert built their new East Storehouse facility, and it's on display there for all to see. It just opened, I think, back to the public this May. So
Yeah, no, I haven't seen it yet.
yeah, I haven't either. So I'm looking forward to getting over there and seeing it reinstalled.
Yeah, I think I remember seeing it when I was first. But anyway, another question. Julie Siglin, who's the director of the Wharton Esherick Museum, raises a question that I'm sure everyone managing a historic site or museum is thinking about these days. That in the how shall we call it, the current climate of public support for arts and cultural institutions. And noting that Taliesin East or North recently got a grant from the state of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Where do you need to look for for support for the projects like the ones that you're undertaking and that we hope that we'll be undertaking?
Always a challenge, and to say Wharton Esherick's one of my favorite sites. So yeah, we were very fortunate with the Redevelopment Assistance Capital Program to receive
this is the what we call RACP grants.
Our RACP, we call it RCAP, whatever you want to call the acronym. But yeah, if you can demonstrate economic benefit to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you can apply for that matching state grant program. So that's helped us with about half of the total project budget for this, and then the rest was all private fundraising. So as many of you probably know, Pittsburgh is very fortunate in the fact that its foundation community heavily supports arts and culture. So they were vital to us, obviously, during the pandemic and helping to keep us thriving during the pandemic, and they've been intensely generous with these current preservation efforts. So foundations, private giving, and just hitting the pavement and finding the support where you can. We see about 140,000 visitors a year, but that visitation revenue is pretty much completely eaten up by just the day-to-day operations of the site and keeping us going for the visiting public. So anytime we do a large-scale preservation project like this one, we have to seek private funding for that, which is never easy. But
yeah, we are quite fortunate in Pennsylvania, aren't we, that we do have a state program, the what I'm calling the RACP program, and it does turn out that economic benefit, if you simply don't fire the people who are working there already, that counts as an economic benefit. So the hurdle, there is not there is not a gigantic hurdle there, except that there's only a limited amount of funding, and we're hoping to make use of that and match. We have to match it. In the work that we're doing. Another question about that extraordinary post-tensioning project, which I remember when it was going on, and what's question was basically how long did it take? What was the period of time during which the building was taken apart?
Yeah, that post-tensioning project actually was done with some pretty tight efficiencies. So they were trying to get it done again, largely when the site was closed to the visiting public over the winter. So, taken up at the end of 1 year, the floor exposed at the end of 1 year, post-tensioning cables put in, and then late spring, the following, everything sort of put back together and the house reopened. There was a window of time where visitors were allowed to come in and see the whole system of the house exposed, which was kind of fun for the visiting public to see. But yeah, it wasn't a super long project for just the post-tensioning. But at that same time, roofing was redone, steel was conserved, sort of a same regime that we're trying to accomplish now, just 20 years later.
Yeah. No, I think it's remarkable the use that you make. Basically, the conservation and restoration project itself became part of the visitor
Yeah, part of
experience,
the
which is, I
visitor
think,
experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really, we've certainly got to think about that. A question, that question was from Joanne Stevenson, by the way. Margie Gorman asks, are there any Kaufman family members currently involved with the property?
So the Edgar Kaufman Jr. was an only child, and Edgar Kaufman Jr. had a life partner, Paul Mann. Paul Mann's nephew is on our advisory committee and is heavily involved with the site. So he is one, and then another first person association of Edgar Kaufman Jr. and the family, the Alex Spire. The Spires were the Kaufman's best friends, were often out here at Fallingwater. So we have at least those two first person associations with the family that are still heavily involved with our advisory committee.
Well, thank you. I think that wraps it up for the questions that I see in the chat. Um, and as the grandfather clock strikes over my shoulder, it is literally my grandfather's clock. Herb, have we other things? Well, one thing I want to say for myself is we certainly thank all of you who joined us this evening. We encourage you to join the Beth Shalom Preservation Foundation. You can do that on our website. It gives you a discount at our wonderful, for the wonderful merch that we have in the design store. And we welcome you. Please come and visit the extraordinary mountain of glass that Frank Lloyd Wright built with the congregation at Beth Shalom on a hilltop north of Philadelphia in the 1950s. Herb, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, again, I want to thank you, Justin, for all of your time and for the wonderful
Thank you.
presentation.
Yeah.
And I also want to especially thank David for his role. And I certainly want to mention Jill Rosen, who was instrumental in putting this night together. So I definitely want to acknowledge their contribution. I'll mention that our next program schedule at Beth Shalom is on Sunday, the 9th of November at 3 o'clock for a lecture with Emily Cooperman, and she'll be talking about the work of Louis Kahn. So we're looking forward to that. And everything else, I hope that you'll check out our website that I mentioned earlier, and for tours and shopping and and membership opportunities. But I'll close with that. And I thank you again for coming.